This is the review of test number 2, version 1. I'm going to be doing the front side of the test in this video. You're probably going to want your formula sheet handy, as well as your unit circle. So the first question asked me to find tangent of 5 pi over 12 using the sum or difference formula. Now I think it's easiest to work in degrees when you're doing these. So if you remember from class, we learned that 5 pi over 12 equals 15 degrees. So I'm going to do 5 times 15, and that gives me 75 degrees. So this problem is actually finding the tangent of 75 degrees. Now, because I'm using the sum or difference formula, I want to find things that add or subtract to equal 75 degrees. So I'm going to use my unit circle. And some things that add or subtract to 75 degrees, you have 30 plus 45. You also can do 135 minus 60. Now we've talked about this before, how if you're going to use one of the unit circle points and the tangent is a fraction, you're actually making your life harder. So personally, I would choose the tangent of 135 minus 60 because those are -1 and the square root of 3, and they do not use fractions. So we're going to change my problem to the tangent of 135 degrees minus 60 degrees. So I need to look on the front here, the tangent of A minus B, because I'm doing 135 minus 60. And copy down my formula, which is the tangent of A minus the tangent of B divided by 1 plus tangent of A times tangent of B. Now remember, this was the formula for A minus B. The order does matter for subtraction, so all my A's are going to be 135, and my B's are going to be 60. So looking on our circle here, the tangent of 135 is -1, minus the tangent of B, so the tangent of 60 is square root 3. Divided by 1 plus the tangent of 135 is -1 times the tangent of 60, which is square root 3. And this is a common mistake for people. They add instead of multiply first. So if you remember PEMDAS, you have to do your multiplication first. So -1 times square root 3 is negative square root 3. So my final answer looks like that. All right. Problem number 2 says simplify using the sum or difference formula. So I have cosine of 3 pi over 2 plus x. So this is a cosine, and since I'm adding, it's going to be an A plus B formula. The formula for cosine A plus B is cosine A cosine B minus sine A sine B. So now we are going to fill in the a's and b's. A is 3 pi over 2, and b is x. Then we can't figure out what the cosine of x is or what the sine of x is. So you just are going to leave those alone. You're only going to fill in what is the cosine of 3 pi over 2. So cosine is the x coordinate. So that's going to be 0. Sine of 3 pi over 2 is the y coordinate. That's -1. And then we're just going to be simplifying. 0 times cosine x, that makes 0. Negative times -1 here, we're going to get a positive sine of x. And 0 plus sine of x just leaves me with sine of x. Number 3 says evaluate using the half angle identity, and it's sine of 112.5. So the half angle identity for sine is this formula. The first thing that you have to do for the half angle identity problems is multiply the angle that they give you by 2, and then you're going to put it where the x is. So this is going to be 1 minus the cosine, and then 112.5 times 2. It's 245. That is so wrong. I am so sorry. 225. Next, we are going to fill in what is the cosine of 225. So if we look on my unit circle here, 225, the cosine is the x coordinate. So it's negative square root 2 over 2. And we go through our steps. We have to first find a common denominator. So this denominator is 2, so I'm going to change my 1 to be 2 over 2. The next step, we were calling it squish it together, but it's really combine the fractions that are in the numerator. So put these together, and you get 2 minus a negative square root 2, which is 2 plus square root 2. My denominators are the same, so that's 2, and it's still all being divided by 2. Then we are doing the step where you flip the denominator, you multiply by the reciprocal. Now, we don't know what the square root of 2 plus square root 2 is. You can just leave that alone, but we do know what the square root of 4 is. The square root of 4 is 2. And we just need to decide if it's positive or negative. So you go back to your original angle. My original angle is 112.5. 112.5 is located in the second quadrant, and sine is positive in the second quadrant. So my answer should only be the positive square root of 2 plus square root 2 over 2. You want to make sure that your square root sign doesn't dip down into the denominator. All right, so for number 4. Number 4, we are solving. Now for sine of 2x, we want to look at the double angle identities. So the double angle identity, sine of 2x equals 2 sine x cosine x. So I'm going to replace sine of 2x with 2 sine x cosine x equals sine of x. Now in order to solve, you have to get it equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract sine x on both sides. You cannot divide by sine of x because then you're going to be getting rid of some answers. Now when I have things repeating, I am going to use GCF factoring, so they both have a sine x in common. You put that in the front, and you're left with 2 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. Now you can use the zero product property, which just means that I can split them up because it's multiplication. And I can have sine x equals 0 and 2 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. Now sine is the y value. So for sine x equals 0, I'm looking on my unit circle, I'm looking where is the y value equal to 0. That is at 0 and pi. Two cosine x minus 1 equals 0. I would have to add 1 to both sides. Divide by 2. And cosine is the x coordinate. So where does the x coordinate equal a half? So that's at pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. Have one more problem to get us through that front page. Number 5. Number 5 is sine squared x minus 2 equals the cosine of 2x. So for this problem, the cosine of 2x, I'm looking for the double angle formula for cosine. Now there are 3. The one that you choose should be you see how there's a sine squared here? So I want to choose the cosine 2x formula that just has a sine in it. So that would be this bottom one. It's the only one that has the sine by itself. So I'm going to replace cosine 2x with 1 minus 2 sine squared x. Now, just like for the other problems, I want to get this equal to 0. So I'm going to add 2 sine squared x on both sides. Subtract 1. Now I can see that the only trig function I have is a sine squared x. So now I want to get that by itself. And I'm going to start off by adding 3 to both sides. Dividing by 3. So I have sine squared x equals 1. Because it is squared, you want to take the square root of both sides. So you have sine x equals a positive or negative 1. Remember that sine is the y value. So where is the y value, positive or negative 1? That would be at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2.